Our next session will be Faith as a Resource Against Domestic Violence. Our chief speakers will be Bonita McGee and Safaa Zarzour. Safaa Zarzour holds a Juris Doctorate degree from DePaul University School of Law and a Master's in Education from the University of Illinois, Chicago. He's currently the Executive Director of the Islamic Society of North America. He was an adjunct professor of law at Loyola Law School, teaching courses in education and Islamic law. For over a decade, he served as a teacher and then principal at Universal School, one of the largest pre-K through 12 independent Islamic schools in the United States. He is the chairman of the Council of Islamic Schools of North America, which claims membership of 50 Islamic schools and educational organizations. As an attorney, Mr. Zarzour is also a principal of the law firm of Zarzour, Khalid and Tabara. He focuses his law practice in the areas of local government, education, and nonprofit law. And I'm going to introduce our second speaker as well right now. Our second speaker is going to be Bonita McGee. She has extensive experience of outreach and activism in the American Muslim community as president and co-founder of the Muslim Family Services and is a counselor in the Domestic Violence Unit in the D.C. Superior Court. She has served as co-chair of Domestic Violence Awareness and Conference Program, chair at the Islamic Society of North America, and she's also a board member of the Islamic Social Services Association of the U.S. and Canada. She has received a number of honors, including the Walter and Marian English Award for Social Services in 2001. And she recently received her Master's of Arts in Islamic Studies in the Graduate School of Islamic and Social Sciences in Leesburg, Virginia. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Dr. Safaa Zarzour.
Thank you, Lubaba. Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you this morning to talk about this very important topic in domestic violence and faith as a resource in combating domestic violence. As an educator, I got to face this issue of domestic violence face to face, serving as a teacher in one of the Islamic schools in the United States. Today, we have over 350 Islamic schools nationwide. I happen to be in Chicago as a principal, and I remember having to struggle as a new teacher when I realized that one of my students was coming in the morning and sometimes having perhaps bruises that he's trying to cover, taking him aside, talking to him, realizing that his dad is not happy with his work and his progress in school, was hitting him. When I asked him about if he told anybody, if he told his mother, eventually discovered that the dad also does not hesitate to hit his wife as well. So I called the father for a conference to talk to him about the issue, to ask him about it, and to my surprise, I really expected the father to deny it, to pretend that the kid doesn't know what he's talking about. To my surprise, the father, having his child in an Islamic school, started attempting to justify what he does, and even trying to want to justify it using religion. And that was, for me as a teacher, was a huge eye-opener, because although I realize that there are some things, especially within, and if we talk here about domestic violence within the Muslim community and when we talk about it within perhaps immigrant communities in general, whether it's refugee communities or immigrant communities in general, that I realize that is something that perhaps not surprising if it happens, but to hear someone trying to justify it as something that is okay was really quite shocking to me. Obviously, as an educator, I went to my principal. My principal went ahead and called DCFS, that's in Chicago, and we took it from there. But that kind of opened my eyes to this possibility of people not only trying to justify why is it that they abuse, and they may consider that laying a hand on their child or their spouse as something that they are justified with, but to try to justify it on faith ground was quite a surprise to me, or took me aback. And so I made it my business, and later on becoming a principal of the very same Islamic school for the next 8 years after that, I really tried to make sure that we carry out some education of our parents, and to basically try to make sure that at the very least, if those parents are going to do wrong, especially the father, that they do not justify it using faith. Because although, and my co-presenter is going to go over some perhaps text within the Islamic tradition that may be used by some people as a justification for domestic violence. In fact, the most authentic practice within the religion, which is the practice of the Prophet of Islam, goes clearly contrary to any attempt to justify domestic violence using faith. In fact, it is to the contrary. It is to the contrary in that faith, and in this case the Islamic faith, if we are to educate parents, Muslim parents about it, can be quite a useful tool and quite an ally in our quest to eradicate domestic violence, in this case from immigrant communities, especially ones that hail from Islamic background. I will present to you a series of either instances or pronouncements by the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him, that go to the heart of this matter. It is said, reported by the companions and those who lived around the Prophet, and I'm quoting, and I'll use the Arabic just to kind of authenticate the sayings, because he did utter them in Arabic. It is said by his companions that the Prophet that the Prophet never laid a hand in his life on a woman or a child. That is a recorded statement. It is also reported that at one time some women came to the wife of the Prophet complaining to her about her spouse laying a hand on her. The Prophet, when he came home, was told the statement, and he basically immediately went out, and that was his habit when something really major happens, when he wants to basically lay the grounds and lay a new rule or lay the law, more or less, within the community. He went out to the mosque, he asked for the people to be gathered, he went to the pulpit, and he stood up and said that many wives have come to my house complaining of their spouses. I am telling you that those of you who do that are the worst among you. They are not the best among you. And in another incident, he told his companions that the best among you and closest to God are those who are best among you to their spouses, kindest among you to their spouses, and I am the kindest among you to my spouses. And so when Muslims attempt to use faith as a justification for domestic violence, they really, in the practice of the Prophet and his pronouncements, they have absolutely no justification whatsoever to do so. And so it is very important for us, and it has been a very important matter for us at the Islamic Society of North America to try to make sure that Muslims in the United States are aware of that. So for example, ISNA, as early as 1999, started and had the very first conference combating domestic violence in the Muslim community in 1999, and it continued that until about 2004, 2005. Sister Bonita McGee was one of the original people that started the program with the Islamic Society. And our goal and strategy was to do several things. First, to try to create the resources and the material that we can disseminate to community members through the Islamic centers, through the mosques, but also, more importantly perhaps, at that time, to be able to bring together those individuals that are working in the counseling, family counseling, and working as professionals within the Muslim community, to be able to come together and be able to basically meet and be able to support each other and start perhaps in every community, especially communities like Chicago, like Detroit, where there is a large concentration of Muslims and places where perhaps a lot of the influx of refugees and new immigrants first come to settle, to try to establish centers and place for people who are facing abuse and facing domestic violence, to be able to go where someone is going to be there to help them, to inform them of their rights, provide them with the help and the support they need. Because the most difficult thing for many of the victims within the community is their feeling of helplessness and feeling that if they go somewhere to a person of authority, the imam of the mosque or someone like that, that they would not receive the help that they needed. So it was very important for us to start the conferences, bring the professionals together, and start giving them the space and the place and the support to be able to reach out to the community where it is, and be able to provide the help. Another thing that the Islamic Society of North America have tried to do is to make sure that anytime we are asked by local Muslim community leaders, and anytime we have the chance to be able to state our position as the largest umbrella organization of Muslims in America, that there is no place for domestic violence in Islam as a religion, and that the Muslim community in America, especially those members of it that come from societies and communities that continue or have in the past or continue to tolerate such a violation, that we in the United States as a Muslim community are determined that we make sure that this does not happen. Obviously, there's a long road to go, and the resources usually are far short from the need and from the reality. There are many challenges, the least of which is the fact that many of newly arriving immigrants as well as refugees, they tend to, when they first arrive in the United States, they tend to shy away from being in the Muslim community, but also they tend to shy away from seeking help, feeling that it would be shameful for them to do so. So many times, to be able to provide the comfort and to provide a comfort level and initial contacts that just basically tries to make those individuals comfortable enough to come forward is something that has been very, very important for us. We've started an online resource page on our website. We continue to provide the support and the help for those professionals that that are in the field, and we actually have basically started bringing together scholars in the religion, trying to come up with a definitive document that we can distribute to the Muslim community nationwide, basically stating unequivocally our position. We also work, as I told you, my first experience with this issue was with the Islamic schools. We work closely with Islamic schools, advising them on this matter any chance we get. And we have faced a lot of success in that regard. The schools in particular have been very open, obviously, because of the fact that many of them are very aware of their responsibility from a legal point of view, regardless of any other consideration. But when they realize that we are able to provide them with the religious, kind of foundation for why is it that they should be active and beyond just active, to be proactive in applying the law and applying the rules without hesitation, has been a source of comfort for a lot of them. We have tried to be very clear on the fact that when you delay or hesitate in trying to combat an incident of domestic violence that comes to your attention as an educator, you're not only doing disservice to the student who comes to you or the person who is on the receiving end of such a violation, but you are also putting yourself in basically risk of having yourself being responsible. In Illinois, for example, and as professionals, you know that teachers are obligated to report domestic violence and abuse, and that if they, abuse of children that are aware of, and that if they do not do so, they themselves can become liable for lack of reporting. For us, overall, it is a struggle, an ongoing struggle. However, we are unwavering in our commitment to making sure that as the Muslim community continues to grow and as the influx of both immigrants and refugees continue to grow, that we would like to make sure that those people coming into the community are aware fully that there's support and help for them, but also those of them who come with habits and traditions that are not compatible with Islam to start with, but also not compatible with the laws of this land, that will not be tolerated, and that if they are to choose an alternate route, they will have every support that they need in that regard. I leave the rest of the time for my co-presenter, who really has been in the field for so many years and have developed a full program that really is a model program that we were proud and happy to be at the beginning of it, supporters, and hopefully will lay more details, or will give more details about this matter, and after that we will be ready for your questions after her presentation. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful the rest of the program.
I'm sorry, I always have a lot of stuff. I'm a pack rat even when I travel, so apologies. But I do like to bring a lot of show and tell with me. So I'll be showing you actual physical copies of the resources that I'm going to be referencing. And I encourage you that after this session or throughout the conference to stop, flip through them, look at them, and find out what resources are most helpful for you and your community and what you're looking at and looking for, so that you can see that we've come a long way. The other disclaimer I have before I begin is that I really had a pretty PowerPoint design, but the lights were not on my side. So forgive the boring black and white, but I thought I'd save your eyes and not have you all squinting at the screen. So we'll just do a black and white. I'm sure the content is the most important part, but as a facilitator, I had to put that out there, that I did have a very nice PowerPoint ready for all of you. So just to do a brief introduction again, my name is Bonita McGee. I have been doing domestic violence work. Oh, I guess it depends on when you want to start the clock, but it seems like most of my adult life. I started doing sexual assault awareness work in college that grew more into doing domestic violence work. I then started working a lot in African-American communities and then transitioned to working mostly in Muslim communities because the awareness level at that time was so incredibly low and such a need was there that I then shifted my focus on doing mostly working with Muslim communities. And that's how my work began with ISNA and has grown from there. I also like to say that I have done almost every range of domestic violence work that you can think of, from working in a shelter to doing hospital advocacy, working with court systems, and everything in between. So I have a nice little range of experience in terms of dealing with domestic violence from different perspectives. And so the last thing I want to do before I actually formally start is to encourage everyone to please ask your questions. I know that for some of you, you work more with Muslim communities, so some of this you may know, others are curious, but what I always like to say is that, you know, I'm African American, I was born and raised Muslim, so there are things that you can ask that is okay to ask, and I want to make sure I provide a safe space for you to ask the question you need to ask. Because the point is not for me to give you an infomercial, the point is for you to walk away feeling like you are a better advocate, that you're more competent to do what you need to do. So I can't promise you're going to like all my answers, but I want to ensure you and assure you that you can ask the question. And if it's something that I can't answer, then I will find the answer for you. Okay? All right, so let's start. This seems a little unstable, so I'm gonna try to be good. So it's countering spiritual abuse. And so the focus of this is going to be looking at how religion is used as a power control tactic in domestic violence. There are a lot of aspects of domestic violence that we can talk about, but we're going to try to focus on that. There are other elements that I will touch upon, but because of there are sessions later that deal more with the cultural and other religious manifestation of how that works out, that will be happening later in the conference. I will leave it to that, but I will touch upon issues of help-seeking behavior, re-victimization, and things like that that may impact your advocacy as we're talking about this specific topic of spiritual abuse. So with that. Okay, one of the things that I like to do always is to start with a working definition. This has been something that I think is critical in terms of when we start conversations and dialogues, is that it's important for you as the audience to know what I'm talking about when I say domestic violence. So there's no confusion. I like to use the NCADV working definition of domestic violence, which is abuse is a pattern of behavior used, That's not supposed to happen. Abuse is a pattern of behavior used to establish power and control over another person through fear and intimidation, often including the threat or use of violence. Battering happens when one person believes he or she is entitled to control another. Assault, battering, and domestic violence are crimes. And the takeaway from this is that I want to also say that this definition is in complete alignment with Islamic values and principles. So this is a definition that can be used readily in Muslim communities. And domestic violence is also considered criminal under Islamic law. So this is not a definition that is foreign or needs any kind of adjustment. You can go and you can start this as a dialogue piece when you're interfacing with Muslim communities as a viable working definition of domestic violence. Okay, so one of the things that the first question everyone has is, what does Islam has to say about domestic violence? And how can Muslims respond to domestic violence in added value ways? Well, over the course of years, advocates have been asking themselves this question. And the model that comes away in terms of based on Islamic principles is one is anti-oppression. So why anti-oppression? Anti-oppression models within Islam work such that, my slides are not, okay. Anti-oppression models work such that based on the Quran and the Sunnah, the Quran is considered the book of Muslims and the word of God according to Muslims. The Sunnah is what things that the Prophet Muhammad said, did, or approved. So these are the core resources of how Muslims build their society, their law, everything, their values. All of it comes from those two core sources. And so this anti-oppression model gives us a guide in terms of looking at what is acceptable and unacceptable. And oppression is a concept in Islam that is dealt with very seriously. And anything that falls under the realm of oppression, there are clear instruction given to Muslims of how to address and how to overcome oppressive behavior. And so domestic violence by its mere definition falls under the definition, falls under that concept of oppression. And so using an anti-oppression framework or a social justice framework overlays very nicely with Islamic principles and values. So if any of you in terms of, and I use this as emphasis because if those of you who are collaborating or trying to figure out how do I connect with Muslim communities, you know, there are some concepts we'll deal with a little later that help you say, well, you all also believe this as well. So this is where we can connect. You know, because it's about building collaboration in terms of addressing some of these things. But the model I wanted to also put forth is that in Islam or in Muslim communities, marriage is a very core building block of the community. Yes? Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is also very interesting. I just want to know, is your PowerPoint on the CD?
The PowerPoint's not on the CD, but I can email it to you. But hopefully by the end of this, you won't be so worried about my PowerPoint, but the resources I'm going to give you. So these are so we'll get to that, and I'm happy to give you my PowerPoint. Not that it's not fabulous, but what I want to make sure people know is that these are the tools that we want you to walk away with. So this is just kind of framing the setup for what's really going to help you walk away and use every day. Okay. But the framework of marriage is very central to Muslim communities. Thank you for your question, by the way. It's very central. And how does Islam frame a marriage? Well, Islam frames a marriage in such that successful marriages, mind you, successful marriages in Islam incorporate things such as trust, mercy, consultation, and tranquility. And these are things that can be referenced back to the Quranic source. So I'm not just making that up. They can come back to the Quranic source where you can say, in a marriage, in this verse, this is what is in a marriage. And so you have this counters the concept of humiliation, cruelty, and violence from either party in the marriage. So we have these proactive, positive paradigms of marriage, of how people relate to one another, that counter these domestic violence, how domestic violence manifests itself in a marriage. And so we have those that help support the anti-oppression model because we have these wonderful frameworks that then support, okay, well, if you are this far away from this paradigm, how do we help you get there? Because a lot of women in domestic violence situations in Muslim communities want the abuse to stop, but they don't want the marriage to end. government. And so this is a very interesting place to be as advocates, and how do we support and educate her enough to find out what that path looks like, you know. And so domestic violence falls in the realm of oppression by any standard, and it's unacceptable in Islam. It is simply unacceptable in Islam. Okay, so these are some core values and principles that negate oppression. First of all is God consciousness. And this goes without saying that the Quranic term is taqwa, and basically it's just that when we are conscious of God and conscious of our being stewards of the earth, of what we have been given responsibility for, then that responsibility is such that, you know, you have to be mindful, you have to be humble, you have to be obedient, and all of these things are to God. So God consciousness is like, for Muslims, is that number one core value that helps ground us into being good stewards of what we are given responsibility for. There's a saying in the Quran that said many times in the Quran about enjoying the good and forbidding the wrong. This is an important verse in the Quran, and is mentioned throughout. And what's lovely about this verse is that the first thing it commands you to do is enjoying the good. It's a proactive statement of enjoying what is good and right, and then forbidding the bad. So sometimes people get it backwards because we like to tell what people are not doing versus what we can be doing. So this is a huge concept in Islam and with Muslims of saying enjoying the good and forbidding the wrong. The next one is justice. Justice is a big concept in Islam, and there's a Quranic verse that I am a huge fan of that talks about justice, and it's in this, your first thing for the day. It's in this lovely brochure, and it talks about, "O you who believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even if it's against yourselves or your parents or your relatives, and whether it's against someone who is rich or poor." So the standards for justice is just that you have to stand for justice regardless. And so this is a concept and a principle that can be used in advocacy work, can be used as countering spiritual abuse. Equality and accountability. And we'll get a little more into some of those a little later, but I want to be cognizant of the time. But these are all concepts and things that in your resources that give the right resources and the right references such that you as an advocate don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just hand them a brochure, and it gives them the response in their language as they understood it in terms of countering anti-oppressive behavior. Okay, so this goes without saying, but I like to say it every single presentation, no matter what, is that domestic violence happens. Domestic violence impacts all Muslims regardless of ethnicity, socioeconomic status, education, or religiosity. Why is this important? It's important to know that, one, a lot of Muslims don't even believe this. So when we talk about educating and competency, when I talk about competency, it's not just with those who work in secular and other faith organizations, but there's a level of competency that needs to continue happening within Muslim communities and with Muslim advocates. Okay, so this is something that is a huge concept, because a lot of times if someone sees someone praying or sees someone's at the mosque a lot, they're thinking, well, that person couldn't possibly be an abuser, because they look from the outside as being a good Muslim, and it just doesn't work that way. We as advocates, you as people who work and seeing people across your door know that that's a different reality, but it's important to say and important to make sure that that's incorporated. So I won't go into the types of violence, of course, but I did want to just frame it such that when we get to spiritual abuse, that we do, as Muslim advocates, recognize all types of abuse: emotional, mental abuse, physical, sexual, resource and financial abuse, and of course spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse is something that has only recently begun to be talked about more and separated out. Some people will put spiritual abuse under resource abuse. Depends on who you're talking to, but I like to kind of let it be its own thing. I think it's a separate issue, and it is fall into resources, and there are aspects of it that have mental and psychological implications, but spiritual abuse is something that is its own thing, and I think as you deal with faith communities, something that all faith communities deal with and work toward. And so I think that it's something that can be meted out. So what is spiritual abuse? Spiritual abuse at the end of the day is where the abuser uses their faith, misrepresentation of their faith, or her insecurity about her faith to elicit power and control. And some examples of this is denying the person the right to go to the mosque or gain Islamic knowledge. As you know, this is a tool that can be used in terms of isolation, in terms of making sure that the abuser is the only one source of knowledge and information. This gets is especially exacerbated in immigrant populations, where not only is that the truth in terms of religion, but also in terms of status. Okay. Keeping the person spiritually ignorant and depending on their interpretation of Islam. This is also very common. And something that you see sometimes when you have bicultural marriages, where the two people are not from the same culture. They could be either Arab and African American, it can be someone from European American background and someone from Pakistani background or African American. When you have bicultural marriages, you also, or someone who's new to Islam, you see a lot of this type of abuse, where they probably are attracted to Islam because the abuser because of the abuser, and then once they get married, he still remains that source, but now the demands, the tactics have become now as a means of control. And so she doesn't have any other recourse but to listen to him and still hold him as being the more learned one. And if she does not have access to the mosque or to Islamic knowledge, is again a means of control, because Islam dictates one's behavior, one's countenance, one's whatever. So it's a very powerful tool used. Making fun of them. Making fun of if they're praying or if they're learning Arabic. This instills a sense of shame, instills a sense of superiority, and instills a sense of, I know more than you. And so you just stop doing that. And you just listen to me. You don't need to pray because I've told you don't have to pray. So it instills the sense of absolute control and isolation. And then, again, the idea of reinforcing isolation as a control tactic, not allowed to be with other Muslims. Not having those support systems that they would normally find in a mosque or an event to go forth and do that. Okay. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about a particular Quranic verse in a minute, and then I have a DVD that does a much better explanation than I can, but I'm going to, earn my keep and make sure I talk about that. But what I wanted to talk about is that in terms of misuse of Quranic verses, before I go into that, I want to say that abusers abuse because it works for them. They will use whatever means and resources that help them justify it if you challenge them, or justify it for them. But, abusers will use the means by which to say, it's okay for me to do this. But they do it because it's effective for them. So you will have some Muslim abusers who wouldn't bother to cite you a Quranic verse. They simply do the family history and a lot of other factors, won't even need to go that far in justifying what they're doing because they just feel that it's right and it's appropriate. Others will say, well, yes, I can do this because, my understanding of the Quran is such that this, or they only say my understanding. They will simply dictate that their understanding of Islam is superior to yours, and so therefore this is acceptable. So I wanted to put that out there first, that, for many times, an average Muslim man is not going to suddenly read a Quranic verse and then say, oh, I'm going to go hit my wife because it says beating. It doesn't work that way. Abusers already have this privilege in their mind of behavior, and so this is used as a justification for that. So misuse of Quranic verses. The misuse of religious texts and sources are used often to reinforce oppressive and violent behavior in the home, as we know. And another reason why this is so easy to do is because in Islam, there's no hierarchy, there's no clergy. So there's in terms of those principles we talked about, in terms of accountability, in terms of, a person can be individually, and they can engage the Quranic text individually and understand it and manifest it for themselves. And this is something that's encouraged, and this is usually a good thing in terms of dialogue, discourse, disagreement, bringing forth evidence. But what's used in how it's used in a domestic violence situation is such that abusers will simply use the most problematic interpretation to fulfill whatever needs that they have. And so what happens in terms of how our interpretations have come across over the years is such that, and this is a quote from Hadi Mubarak that I thought was very, very good, and it says, without understanding the development of Quranic exegesis as a process rather than an event, Muslims have essentially extended the Quran's theoretical infallibility to classical exegesis. Thus, the canonization of Quranic exegesis that developed in the first 5 centuries after the Prophet's, peace be upon him, death resulted in the fixation of certain meanings derived from the Quran. What she's saying in layman's terms is that what has happened is that in the early days of Islam, we had, masterful scholars, and instead of their methodology of approaching the Quran being accepted, it was their conclusions that were accepted as being near to be infallible. So you say, for example, there's a scholar of Islam that says, well, my understanding of this verse is that it says beat, and that may be well the case, but 10 centuries later, or, then you have people who say, well, this interpretation can only mean beat because this scholar said so. So you step away from really the element and the ability to reinterpret and understand the Quran from its source. Instead, what's happened over the course of time is that scholars' interpretations have been taken as infallible. And so this has become a challenge in terms of how do we readdress some of these concerns and issues and looking at the Quran from its source and bringing that to the modern day. So this lays the foundation for continued misuse of Quranic verses. And so the most misused Quranic verse in terms of domestic violence is Surah 4, verse 34. Okay. Now, this verse says this. It says, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah had given the one more strength than the other, and because they support them from their means. Therefore, the righteous women are devoutly obedient and guard the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. As to those women on whose part you fear disloyalty and ill conduct, admonish them first, next refuse to share their beds, and last beat them lightly. But if they return to obedience, seek not against the means of annoyance, for Allah is most high, great above you all. So this is the verse that is the most frequently misused in terms of justifying oppressive behavior. And so we're going to break down the verse, and then we're going to look at a portion of a DVD such that such that scholars themselves can address it. So there's 3 concepts that happen in this verse. One is qawama, Misuse, and daraba. Okay, qawama is in the section where it talks about protectors and maintainers of women. Qawama is often used to promote women's inferiority. The concept, if you want to deal with this verse, deal with this particular concept, what happens is that within Islam there are roles. Most traditionally, the man is considered the maintainer in terms of financial. In a marriage family construct, they provide the financial means and bearings. This means that the woman is not required to work if she doesn't want to, and her income that she does have is not required to go toward the family means. So she can have her own income, she can spend it as she wants if she so chooses, is not required to go toward the maintenance of the family. The husbands, however, money is required to go to the maintenance of the family. Now, in reality, most people are 2 incomes. Both people share in the responsibility of that. So that's a traditional means of saying that. What's been used, however, from an abuser's perspective is saying that this injunction has given me complete unilateral ability to be absolutely in charge of every single aspect of the family. That's not what it says. It says you have to pay for the food. It says you have to pay for rent. It doesn't say that you have a unilateral injunction to control your family in such a way. And so there are responses to that, and I'll leave that to the DVD to go into further with, but in terms of that is something that many abusers use to say, well, if she doesn't do exactly what I say, then that gives me justification. Misuse is a concept in this verse where it says that if she is guilty or if you feel disloyalty or ill conduct. Now, it's translated as ill conduct and disloyalty. And what abusers will use in terms of this concept is say that if she does not blindly do whatever I say, then this is considered ill conduct. So if she doesn't wash the clothes the way I want, if she doesn't fix the food the way I want, this is clearly in the shoes, and I have the onus now, the right to beat her. This, of course, is a clear exaggeration of that. The verse itself is discussing a scenario by which this couple is in distress. And the woman, and it has to be something that's very, very serious, something that goes almost against the religion to meet the criteria of the actions that are supported after that. So what it does not refer to Misuse is that she can have an opinion, she can disagree, she can do all of these things. This is not Misuse. Misuse is something that is a high criteria of conduct by which the faith is threatened or the family is threatened to such an extent that there needs to be interventions, a trial separation, interventions from the family, those kinds of things. Now, the last concept I want to talk about is Wadribuna, and this is the section where it talks about to beat them lightly. Now, two things about this, this interpretation. Many Quranic scholars still translate this as to beat them lightly. But I want you to remember this slide we just talked about when it says that many of those scholars have taken their interpretation from scholars from before them, and no one's really taken the time to go back to the Quranic sources and to the two sources of Quran and Sunnah, which is the Prophet's example, to say, does that make sense? And at the end of the day, as is stated, when you interpret Quran, you use some basic criteria. One, you use the example of the Prophet. What did he do and say in terms of manifesting the Quran as we understand it today? And as we've already been told by Brother Safaa, is that he never hit a woman, he never condoned domestic violence, and he would, and there's no indication in his example that this is an acceptable, that this would be an interpretation that has somehow carried through for, centuries. But nonetheless, it is there, and nonetheless, there are scholars who still say that the literal meaning of this is to beat them lightly. Well, what's happening today is such that we have an increasing amount of scholars who are challenging this interpretation, who are saying that doesn't make sense. This verse is meant to say marriage is in crisis, and these are the steps that you can take to help reconcile this marriage in crisis. You first say, don't do that, then you separate, then you leave their beds, and then you separate. And then the verse following this verse says that you then bring arbitrators from both sides of the family. Now, if the concept of marriage in Islam is to have tranquility, trust, mutual consultation, then this interpretation doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow the framework by which we're given in Islam of how a marriage operates, or how a successful marriage operates. Because I guarantee you, hitting someone is not going to help them get to more trust, mutual consultation, or tranquility in a marriage. So what's happening now is that you have scholars, you have Muslim advocates who have been doing this work for a very long time saying, we've got to rethink this. We've got to rethink it, and we have to do more than talk about it. We have to start putting it down on paper. We have to start doing better translations of our Quran such that when people read it, it's clear. It's clear that it doesn't mean to be, it means to separate, it means to go away from. It doesn't mean to beat that person lightly. And the idea, and I used to always pick on imams that I was working with, the idea of beating someone lightly is just a joke. Like, listen to what you're saying. You say, we don't believe in domestic violence, so we don't believe in beating, and then you give a 15-minute explanation of how to beat them lightly. It's counterintuitive, like you guys, and there are imams who are getting it. They're getting it, they're understanding, yeah, I get what you're saying now. I get that that's counterintuitive. I get that when I'm saying that and I'm trying to explain this verse, that there are survivors in the audience, and you've just pushed them away as a source of you helping them. Most imams do not agree that domestic violence is acceptable, and they're very much against all forms of domestic violence. So you have this kind of tension between how some will defend the verse as it's interpreted, but be against domestic violence. And so what we're trying to do as advocates is say, you got to go further, you got to go to the next step. You can't say I'm against domestic violence and say, well, I completely agree with this interpretation. It just doesn't add up with that. So we do have an emerging discourse on this verse, like I said before. There's an increasing amount of academic articles. I referenced one by Hadia Mubarak. It's called Breaking the Interpretive Monopoly. You can find it on Brill. If you want the actual article, just let me know. I can email it to you. She goes into an extensive on breaking down the verse and breaking down how it's been interpreted and breaking down what are the next steps for how we're going to really understand this verse for future generations. And Muslim advocates and scholars are working together. This hasn't always happened. Working together to say, let's look at this again. Let's figure out how we're going to address this situation. We're not connecting the dots. So Muslim advocates and imams are starting to connect the dots in terms of addressing domestic violence holistically and saying you can't have this over here dangling and still be effective over here. You got to connect the dots. And so that's happening, and we're working on shifting paradigms and norms and changes. And the reason why this isn't critical, why I've spent so much time on this verse, is because you will not only find that abusers will use this, but also survivors and just some Muslim women themselves will say, well, he can discipline me. It's right there. So there's a lot, when I'm talking about competency and I'm talking about norm change, it's not just with abusers, it's a whole lot of shifting that needs to be going on. and a lot of facets. But there's hope, and there's more collaboration than ever with scholars and Muslim domestic violence advocates in terms of really addressing this holistically. So what's the result of all of this misuse of religion? At the end of the day, it creates a crisis of faith. At the end of the day, a woman who has chosen Islam, has embraced Islam, and then at the same breath is told that she is not acceptable, inferior, that she can be beaten, and then she reads the Quran and she reads these problematic interpretations, it creates a crisis of faith. How can I, as a believing woman, as a Muslim woman, accept every word of the Quran, but then I have this verse that I cannot accept into my heart? It causes psychological pain. It causes a lot of psychosocial issues. It is very, very difficult. And it also may keep her in violent situations. A person's understanding of their faith over time becomes warped. So they're not only, where in the beginning they may have questioned it, over time they're now putting forth the misrepresentation, the misunderstanding, and they're passing it on to their kids. Or they're passing it on to, maybe they volunteer at the local Sunday school. You know, when little things come up between Jamila and Tariq. Well, Tariq, you know, reinforcing certain things because of that misrepresentation, because of that misunderstanding. So it goes further than just the family. This is the key thing we're also telling Muslim communities. It goes beyond the family. It doesn't just stay there. When you have that warped idea of religion, it permeates everywhere that person touches. And so it matters. Oh, this is going ahead of me, huh? And then some people just stop being Muslim. they're just like, you know what, forget it. I don't trust this. I worked at a shelter for Muslim women. I worked at a shelter for secular and other faith, services, and we had Muslim women come through, and then we would have some, unfortunately, if you work long enough at a shelter, you will see generational abuse. A young woman comes in with her kids, and she says, oh, I used to be here. And, I was here as a kid. And so one woman in particular she was asking about my scarf, and she was using perfect terminology and asking me about festivals and holidays, and I was like, wow, you're really educated about Islam. And she says, well, I used to be Muslim. I used to when I was a kid, but my father was horrible. My father was horrible. And so she went through her crisis of faith, and she not only lost faith, not just in Islam, but she lost faith. And so when you're talking about faith communities, and I know for maybe this is not as important for people who are working, who may think that that's not a big deal, but if you're working with faith communities, it's a big deal. When you say people turn away from the faith, or turn away from faith, or turn away from God, that's huge. And it's something that matters whether you're working with Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindu, whoever. It's a huge consequence of violence that people are so disenfranchised with what they were experiencing because of the abuser's misrepresentation that they turn away from their faith, and that some even turn away from God. So this is when you're interacting and collaborating with communities, it matters. Okay, so here are some basic issues that may impact your advocacy. And I'll go through these briefly. Let me check my time. Okay, we're going to go through these briefly, and then I have a 5-minute section of a video I wanted to show you, because this is something you're going to get later on, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it. Things that impact your advocacy in terms of dealing with abuse, dealing with spiritual abuse, is the religiosity of the person, their general challenges in seeking help within Muslim communities, their attitudes on religion and culture, and re-victimization. I'm not going to talk too much about the first three because you'll get more into that later in the day. But I do want to talk about re-victimization for just a second. One, because we don't talk about re-victimization enough. We don't think about it enough. We don't think about how our systems re-victimize. We don't think about how our communities re-victimize. We don't think about how, as advocates, as we're giving services, that we may be party of re-victimization, or how that manifests itself. So I wanted to spend just a quick amount of time on that. Re-victimization happens in different facets. By the Muslim community, a person who's trying to seek help by designating whether she's a good enough Muslim to receive the right types of services or the best services. So this idea of I'm not a good enough Muslim to be helped can something that can permeate and be a part of re-victimization. Or communities and advocates saying, well, you're not wearing a scarf, or you didn't say inshallah after you said such and such. These are all signs that you're a problem client. This is a form of victimization. Person's concerned with what she's wearing rather than where she's sleeping. You will have some people in Muslim communities who completely oblivious to where she's going to sleep tonight. But does she have a scarf? Does she need some long clothes? It's like she needs a place to stay. Let's start there. She needs rent for next week. Let's start there. So they kind of and bless their hearts. They don't mean it in a harmful, harshful way. They're not thinking like that. They're just not well enough established in helping in terms of saying, meeting the client where they're at, listening to what the client says their needs are, and presuming that these automatically are her needs, so let me just start with that. So it's about shifting how effective they are in helping, and that's where advocates can come in. Intercultural misunderstandings and assumptions. When you're working with some Muslim communities have very diverse ethnic backgrounds in terms of who they serve, but sometimes services are only, some Muslim communities have very good services that serve Indo-Pakistani communities very well, but don't serve African Americans very well. They have African-American communities that are very good at serving African-American Muslims very well, but have some challenges in educating and helping those who are maybe of Eastern European background. So when I talk about competency happens across the board. So we don't have as many good things about that. By other faith and secular DV advocates, again, the concept of people being more concerned about what she's wearing or doesn't have to wear. You don't have to wear that now. You don't have to do that now. Do you really want to pray? All those little insinuations that you can just leave that alone. Just leave that Islam thing alone. It's okay. You can come be, And actually, many Muslim women won't go and go to secular other faith shelters or go seek services outside of their community because they fear that they have to leave their religion at the door, or that they're going to be encouraged to be a white feminist, or that Islam is going to be judged such that, well, we know that's what you guys do, that's what happens. And so you have a serious challenge of re-victimization. Again, the same thing that I would tell Muslim advocates, I will tell secular and other faith advocates, listen to your client. What help are they asking you for? Don't worry about what they're wearing so much, unless they don't have any clothes. And then you can say, well, you can go shopping. And then these are some resources so you can go. So secular and other faith advocates have the same challenges in dealing with those concepts as well. And it's a form of re-victimization. Because I tell you this, as I've also worked in a shelter, when you have people who are desperate and they want help, and they even sense that you will help them more if they take off their scarf, they will take off their scarf. If they sense that they get more services if they go to a Bible study, to the Bible study group in your thing, because they get to have first dibs on what's being there, they will go to Bible study, because people survive. And they take cues from you whether you overtly say it or not. So be aware of your baggage and bias. Legal system and shelter systems, presumptions of language skill, intelligence, or lack thereof. They're insensitive. Well, we know how they're insensitive to dress, modesty issues raised in the shelter, all of those kinds of things. Sometimes communal showers will make a Muslim woman leave. Just not going to do it. Being in a room with 15, having kids in the shelter. Some kids are the age of 12, some are 7. That's a very uncomfortable space for some people who have kids, because in Islam, when you become a certain age as a child, you're considered a little bit more, it becomes a challenge. So those are all things to think about. So what do we do to counter spiritual abuse? Well, there's some obvious things. We're here. Muslim DV advocates are here. I know we may be hard to find. Someone's like we're a unicorn, but we're here. And and we want to reach out to you, and we want you to reach out to us. And if we keep reaching out both ways, we will find each other. We're here to help you not have to figure it out. We're here to help you not have to reinvent a wheel. We're here to help you build the capacity for both your agencies or organizations and for